Have you guys ever finished playing a Paradox grand strategy game and thought, wow, I wish they would make one of these but in modern day? Well, you wouldn't be alone. Hi, my name's RESOULA. I'm a variety content creator, but as you might be able to tell by my video choices, I play a lot of strategy games, especially grand strategy and war games. Ever since about 10 years ago, with the release of Crusader Kings 2, grand strategy games went from being a more niche thing to really blowing up and gaining a lot of casual consumers that were taking part, drastically expanding the scope of the genre and causing many more developers to experiment with creating grand strategy games across all different kinds of historical settings, futuristic settings, and even modern day. However, modern day is in high demand when it comes to strategy games, especially grand strategy or geopolitical games. And if you ask anybody that plays these games, I'm sure that they can tell you that there simply are not enough. When you ask someone what their favorite modern day grand strategy game or geopolitical game is, you might get answers like Superpower, Supreme Ruler, Geopolitical Simulator, or the newest series on this list, which is Real Politics. But after that, not only do the favorites completely dry up, but the options kind of do as well. Now, if you stretch it back to the 80s, you can find grand strategy or geopolitical games that are focused around modern day. There are more of them than just these four. However, I would argue that these four are the biggest of all the competitors and series and games in the modern day setting arena for grand strategy geopolitical games. And you'd be hard pressed to find any other series that are currently out that you can buy that the average grand strategy player even knows about. And now this isn't just a matter of bad research or someone not looking deep enough into a genre to find options. This setting of grand strategy game really just is barren. There's almost nothing to it. So today I'd like to talk to you about why that may be and also tell you about the options you do have in this field and maybe see if any of them might appeal to you. So why aren't there more of these games? Why do developers not make more games for such a highly in-demand market that has almost no competition in it whatsoever? You make a game and it must be successful, right? Well, there's a lot of challenges, and I'm not a developer, so I can't speak to all of them. If you go looking for reasons, you'll find random individuals on the internet saying things like, oh, well, how would you make the combat? How would you make combat work? How would you handle all the internal politics and simulate the population? Modern day is very complex. We don't really know how to do that. That is maybe somewhat true, but maybe not really true considering we've been doing that for decades. The one reason that usually goes unsaid that I would like to bring up and have you think about is it's maybe not about how difficult the game is to make, but the modern day setting itself. Because we have grand strategy games, we've proven we can handle different aspects of grand strategy. But what about the setting? Why is it so little modern? Think about it. How would you make a modern day map of the world? Well, maybe it sounds as simple as go to Google Earth, get the world, and put it on the screen. Here you go. You have the setting that you need. It's so easy. All the data's right there, right? Well, not really. I mean, you got to remember, even Google Earth, Google Maps has different maps because the borders of the world are not accepted internationally. There are more accepted versions of the map, but for example, who owns Crimea? Who owns Tibet? Who owns Taiwan? They may sound like easy questions to you where you are, but think about the population of your country. Think about the population of everybody that agrees with you. Now think about the population of those that don't. Especially let's touch about Taiwan, which is maybe not the hottest topic right now compared to Ukraine, but Taiwan, while being controlled by the government of the Republic of China, being its own independent country and operating without the People's Republic of China really having anything to say or do in their country, there is at least one country where if you go to it, like the People's Republic of China, that has over 1 billion human beings in it, almost or more than an eighth of the world's population, that will tell you that Taiwan simply doesn't exist as a country and that it belongs to them. As delusional as this may sound, this is how the world works. And it's not just about Taiwan, it's about Ukraine. I have been asking a lot about the development of Supreme Ruler 2030 How is the map going to represent the war in Ukraine? How do you simulate a war that's in progress? How do you decide who the victor is? How do you change the map, and how do you do it without getting banned? Go to any modern day grand strategy game that is coming to release or is already released, and you will find plenty of comments like, where's Palestine? Why is Israel here? Israel doesn't exist. Where's Palestine? Hey, where's Kurdistan? Kurdistan's independent. We have independence in Iraq, and there's more Kurds over there and over there. Where's Kurdistan? Why are we not on the map? Forget about how easy it is to get banned in a country in modern day just because you say, make Taiwan an independent country. Historical games like Hearts of Iron 4 are banned in China, the People's Republic of China, because they accurately show the world as it was in its setting. And in the People's Republic of China, they have a very revisionist history. They have decided what history is, regardless of what it is. And according to their new history, China was unified in World War II as the People's Republic of China, even though that faction only really controlled one province and didn't contribute too much to the fighting at all. It was mostly the nationalists and some warlords. But by accurately representing that in a game, you can get your product banned in the most populous, or maybe second most at this point, country in the entire world, one of the biggest gaming markets. Gone. And as we've seen from games that aren't even as complicated as being geopolitical grand strategy, just look at like World of Warcraft. Games that try to do anything to appeal to a Chinese market get called shills for the CCP. They get called out extremely, whether they are or aren't. I won't speak to any specific case, but even in the West, your product may not get banned, but your product can be boycotted anywhere in the world if you simply do not meet the status quo ideology of what the map should look like. To lend this to another genre, it's not even entirely about maps either. It's about simply how things are represented. Think about how little video games we have that are set in the Vietnam War, the Second Indochina War. How do you represent a conflict in any genre that takes place during a war so recent that those that fought in it are still alive in good number, where the events and result of the war, if you ask how it goes, you will get a very different response based on the nationality of the person that you ask. And the education of the war is already so bad that there's literally no consensus on anything remote. Like, compare it to World War II and then ask how that went, and compare that to asking individuals from around the world how Vietnam went. And the whole series of wars involved here, the first, second, third Indochina War, how many individuals even knew there was a first and a third? Not a lot, at least depending on where you're from. And that leads to the business side of things. You know, you have to think about making things accessible to whatever audience you're selling it to while not getting banned by them. On the topic of Vietnam, I'm sure maybe a lot of grand strategy players may be more versed in history than the average person, but how many of you would be totally happy going into a game being told that the reason this war is going on originates to France, that communist China has forces there helping you, the Americans, the South Vietnamese and their allies, to combat the North Vietnamese and the Soviets, that the war ended with a peace agreement brokered by the US in the UN, and that both countries continued to exist after the war was ended, and then tease that within the next decade, a sequel war would happen where China would invade Vietnam, because those are the exact historical accounts of what happened. And yet, at least where I'm from, I know almost nobody would say any of what I just said. They wouldn't even know it. Even with little details, simply challenging what someone thinks they know of a situation, modern day or otherwise, is enough to anger somebody. Because they must be right. You can't be right. They were taught about this. They know. They've known it for decades, maybe. How can you know more than them? Who are you? Now take this and apply it to the insanely complicated and in-depth geopolitical world that we live in. Every single situation that is around the globe, Taiwan, Palestine, war in Ukraine, war in Azerbaijan, and those are only the most common and notable ones that I hear about. There's a lot more. Now that we're done speaking about why they're so few and far between, feel free to let me know, by the way, in the comments, any more reasons you'd like to contribute why you think they're so few and far between. Let's talk about your options if you do want to get into modern day grand strategy games. Let's start with arguably the biggest one, and the one that doesn't hold anything from dipping into every complicated topic that we've mentioned and trying to represent it in their games. The first one would be the Geopolitical Simulator series from Eversim, something that I have made playthroughs and guides on in this channel. It is arguably the most in-depth geopolitical grand strategy game set in modern day that there is. It is also arguably the most, if not one of the most broken ones. Take it from someone who has played these games for about 13 years now. They are incredible to get into. There is a ton of in-depth simulation of the economy, the industries within it, your internal demographics, the difference between the peoples within your country, the laws that you can implement, the way you can handle certain hot topics. Every new hot topic is implemented into the game. When abortion became a big deal, bam, we got it. Corona, bam, we got it. Everything and anything. There is nothing, in my opinion, in the grand strategy genre that rivals this game for depth and total number of systems. However, they're broken as fuck. Ask anyone that's played the game before, especially before the current version, because every version arguably gets less buggy. Long-term games don't really happen. You want to play as a leader and carry your country throughout the entire 21st century, or even a decade, you're probably not going to find that in most of the games. In the newest version, by the way, of the newest game in the series, which is like the 7th or 8th, let's see, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 8th version that they've made of this game. They are literally pumping it out because there's no competition to stop them from doing it. A new DLC every year that just changes things. The game is still so buggy that getting through more than a decade, especially for a content creator, is like nigh impossible. For the average player, you might get past a decade, but the bugs are going to start to add up. The game has long-term, well-known bugs that have never been fixed, such as your numbers, just of money, economy information, and etc., just randomly being destroyed. Oh, you have, here's a random example, 100 billion positive income, and you have no debt because you worked so hard on fixing it? Well, next month comes along, and now it says that you have insert infinite number here income, yet you are insert infinite number here in debt. How the hell did that happen? I don't know, but that's going to be baked into your save file now. Speaking of baked into the save file, the game's warfare system is, while pretty shitty, we're not really talking about that, so broken that the game actively warns you against permanently annexing countries, because then it has to redo a bunch of numbers, and as we already mentioned, numbers can break in this game very, very easily, and when they get broken, they're broken for your save file. Back on to how I mentioned this is actually harder to play for content creators, because the more you save, the more bugs you're going to save into your game, and honestly, the more bugs arise. The game will give you a great first impression, but that's about it. The more you play it, the more you're gonna hate it. I'll make a noteworthy mention about Eversim's 4th generation warfare, which is sort of like Geopolitical Simulator, but not exactly. It's more of an RPG with a grand strategy setting where you more control characters to earn score than simulate a nation and what you can do with it as its leader or a politician within it. Moving on next to my favorite of all the games in this setting would be the Supreme Ruler series. Now, Supreme Ruler is not just a grand strategy game about modern day. It is one that spans time eras. There is a World War I variant, a World War II variant, a Cold War variant, a singular game that takes all of these and merges them into one. There's a 2020 variant, there's a 2010 variant that was made in like the 2000s. There's an even older variant from the 80s, which I'm not going to touch with a 10-foot stick. And there's the new, up-and-coming Supreme Ruler 2030, which I have been covering extensively on this channel. And there's also technically Galactic Ruler, which is I'm sure you can guess, futuristic. Now, for GPS, there's a reason I barely touched Warfare, because it's very underdeveloped, it's very bad, it's very easy to exploit, it sucks. In Supreme Ruler, they took a different approach from Everson. They took a step back from the internal demographic, geopolitical stuff, and got rid of cabinet management and things like that. What they instead chose to focus on was warfare. Quite the opposite to what Everson pumps out. This is a modern-day grand strategy game designed around going around and blowing shit up. Supreme Ruler uses a more traditional resource system with set resources that you need, such as energy, such as agriculture, such as ore, such as timber, military goods, and whatnot. Almost the entire design of the game feels more like it's meant to attract war gamers than grand strategy players. So if Geopolitical Simulator didn't really sound like your style, maybe Supreme Ruler will be. The game really shines in featuring, rather than some preset units across generations, one of the most in-depth tech trees and unit design trees that I think I've ever seen in a video game, if not the most in-depth one that there is, where unit designs from history and real life are represented. The F-35 is an F-35, not a generation whatever the fuck aircraft, and that's the only one that you get, blah blah blah. There are hundreds of designs per nation across the years for historical designs, current designs, and some made-up futuristic designs like walking mechs. If you want to see more of Supreme Ruler, both Ultimate, 2030, or what have you, this is probably the most covered game on my channel. You can check the playlists or also just my videos. You'll be bound to find something. Moving on, however, the next big contender is the Superpower series. And now this one is, in a way, older than every other one that I'm going to bring up here, because it hasn't gotten a good proper sequel since the 2000s. The most popular game in the series is Superpower 2, which tries to sort of be both of the games that I mentioned beforehand. It's not quite as in-depth in anything that it does as Geopolitical Simulator or Supreme Ruler in terms of economic simulation of industries, in terms of internal politics and demographics, or in terms of warfare. Not nearly quite. Unfortunately, Superpower 2, its most popular iteration and arguably one of the most popular modern-day grand strategy games ever released, is from 2004 and hasn't seen a proper sequel. There has been a Superpower 3, I might add. It's just awful. It's so bad, the developers have abandoned it shortly after release, and I don't usually condone saying abandon to a retail game, but when the game releases so broken that some users can barely make it work, well, forget about some users, a lot of users, it's in shambles, and then they just leave, they pull a Mass Effect Andromeda on the game, abandon. While I would recommend this game if you want a mixture of what I mentioned for the two games prior, then you'll have to go back to 2004, so make sure that you are okay with playing older games. Although do note this game isn't perfect in terms of the bugs either. Maybe less about bugs. Superpower 2 has more exploits that can really dampen the fun if you use them. So if you see the global tax feature, just note that is going to spawn money out of thin air, give you infinite money, and also the game has too many resources, and if you get into like the 2050s, everybody will be fully self-sufficient, causing the entire world's economy to collapse. But you'll have fun until 2050. It's so hard to talk about this setting and genre. Either a game is buggy as all shit, it doesn't have the resources to shine, or it's so exploity and its fundamental design is so short-lasting that it accidentally gains the same problems as the first one without even being broken in a technical sense. So with that, let's move on to the fourth one, the last one that I really planned on mentioning, Real Politics. Now this game is, it's like a light version, essentially, of everything else I've mentioned. There is simulation of a lot of things going on here. However, this might be the easiest one of everything I'm mentioning here to get into if you are a newer player to this kind of game. Everything is set up to be very gamey, very easily approachable. You have action points, you have money, there's very little resource management. Units are abstracted into, well, units. You have infantry, you have tanks, nothing any deeper than that. Your ships are pretty much just as good as someone else's ships, except for the fact that you might use action points to buff yours up, and they might not. They might be buffing something else up, and you might retract those action points later, meaning you'll actually get worse ships as the game goes on. They might make theirs better. The game is very balanced in its design. It's spread across all aspects, I think, of grand strategy, not just warfare, but also handling your nation in a geopolitical level and interacting with other nations. The diplomacy isn't the most in-depth, again, very gamey, but with everything we're comparing it to, it's functional, it works, and I have little to no complaints. There is an aspect of your internal population and how they act and how they feel, who they are, and how you can tax them and get money from them. I want to stress for this one that, again, this one is not that in-depth, but I played it and I loved it. If you go into Real Politics expecting something more approachable and easier to get into in a more gamified version of these other games, you will get exactly what you're looking for, and I think, in my opinion, a very fun experience as well. I feel like I don't need to really talk up the other three because they already have popularity despite any shortcomings they might have, whereas Real Politics is not as popular despite being a very good product. That's all the ones I was going to mention to you on the list, and that's really all you'll find to play if you go out to purchase a modern day grand strategy game right now in order to play it. However, I will give a little shout out to World Warfare and Economics, which is an upcoming geopolitical strategy game of this nature here, and it looks to be directly competing with Eversim's Geopolitical Simulator. I haven't played it. I can't speak for the bugs or what the state of the game is, but it looks to be abstracting military in a similar way that Geopolitical Simulator does, while trying to be in-depth in the exact same ways. Maybe I'll end up covering that one more on the channel in the future. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this talk on the state of grand strategy games set in modern day. If you have any thoughts to contribute about the genre, the setting, feel free to leave them in the comments. I feel like a discussion about this setting of games doesn't really happen very often, aside from Paradox players saying, "Oh, I wish someone would make a game like this." Well, they have, and here they are. As a reminder, I make all sorts of content in this genre sphere that you can find on the channel, so feel free to go check out the playlists if you're interested. Otherwise, thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.